Welcome to episode 86 of the Breaking Balls podcast, live post-race from Sonoma, Wine Country Bob, where Kyle Larson has his chalice of water in victory lane.
Do you think they were drinking barefoot out of that?
Absolutely not, Bob. It's not our college experience.
All right, well, we got a lot to break down today. Denny Hamlin's race ended before it even started. Our Fox nightmare is finally over after tonight. If you tuned in for the Australian Supercars drivers, it was a tough day.
Flags in the air. Boogity, boogity, boogity. Let's go racing, boys.
All right, everybody. Welcome to episode 86 of the Breaking Balls podcast. And, well, it was looking a little bleak there. Stage 1 and Stage 2 had me a little concerned for the future of NASCAR at Sonoma on this new repay, but finally Stage 3 got a little bit of green flag racing, an entire green flag Stage 3, of course, and we had Kyle Larson in victory lane.
A lot of interesting racing for, different reasons in Stage 1 and Stage 2. It just was very choppy. Like you said, luckily we got that smooth finish that was Stage 3. If this were a wine flavor profile, we would definitely have to talk about how it was a little bit bitey at the beginning. A lot of yellow flags, a lot of things going on, but ultimately the smooth finish is what kind of brings us into the podcast here. And Kyle Larson, man, the more we talk about it, the more impressive it gets. It just seems like week after week, it's almost inevitable.
Well, for the record, for our listeners here, first of all, if you're new here, go ahead. Welcome to Breaking Balls. Go ahead and like and subscribe if you're new here. We're covering NASCAR on a daily basis. But for our new viewers, if you're looking for a sommelier, you're probably the guy to lean on because I still sick from my college days of drinking that boxed wine. So I'm sure it was bitter the whole stage for me. But I guess you look at this as kind of a tale of two races, where there was really no rhythm at all for Stage 1 and Stage 2 because you really couldn't get it from the start. You had a caution on lap 3. So even on this race where strategy was going to be a thing, caution kind of made it murky early on, and you couldn't really get into a rhythm of, well, we're going to have green flags here and we can get a plan for downtime. There was never a chance to do that until Stage 3 had.
And it was kind of crazy because usually when days like this happen in NASCAR, it's very clearly going to be a strategy race. It's just that. It's very clear. You can kind of understand what guys are doing, depending on when they're stopping and stuff like that. But because of how choppy it was, because of all the yellow flags early in the race, nobody really knew who was running what strategy. But ultimately, you saw it at the end. It turned out to be very important.
When you say nobody knew the strategy, you were not exaggerating at all, because Kyle Larson in the victory lane celebration said, I didn't even know the strategy. I was just doing what my crew chief told me to do. It felt like you finally got a sense of where the strategy and where the cars were going to come out. Maybe with about 20, 30, 40 to go. It seemed like that last pit cycle with about 70 to go kind of set everything up. And you thought, okay, I kind of figured out where this race is. Up until then, it was kind of like last week at Gateway, where it was a long strategy race, but you just really couldn't wrap your head around who was going to be there at the end, because normally you can kind of track out, it's a 2-3 stop race. This one, you knew Kyle Larson was fast, but Joey Logano was fast. He got caught up in stuff early. It was just really who can survive and plan it out at the end.
Yeah, and I think, Kyle Larson's comments after the race actually made me laugh, because what I will say, the advantage of having Cliff Daniels on the pit box is being able to drive the car and just say, you know what, I'm just going to keep driving the car and trust the fact that no matter what strategy we're on, it's probably pretty well thought out. That's the thing with, I guess that's kind of my takeaway from this race is, as good of a race car driver as Kyle Larson is, if he doesn't have Cliff Daniels today to really kind of, navigate this, politely we'll call it a shit show of Stage 1 and 2, and to be able to kind of bring it through and bring him to the finish of the race. I mean, it just a really remarkable performance from the crew chief today. So hats off to Cliff Daniels.
It's a rare combo of one of the best talents in the world, plus one of the best crew chiefs and strategists in NASCAR. And it's a perfect storm when you get today's race at Sonoma. And yeah, let's kind of rewind just a little bit into that Stage 3 and how we got there, because Kyle Larson definitely looked like he was one of the fastest cars there, but he's back there about 8 seconds back of Chris Buescher and Martin Truex Jr. when the final pit cycles had kind of finished out there. 13 laps, newer tires. It was all about, can Kyle Larson work his way through the field? And credit Chris Buescher and Martin Truex Jr., same exact thing for them. They worked their strategy calls to where when that stage 3 started, they were in a position to be at the front of the field. And if it went green, they were going to be in a position to win at the end. Now, as good as Kyle Larson's strategy went for Martin Truex Jr., it was so close. It was almost eerily close to Ryan Blaney's last week, Ad. I mean, you had Martin Truex Jr. hunting down Chris Buescher, was faster, clearly faster, but there was 2 or 3 passing zones at Sonoma that you can really only make that pass. And Chris Buescher did a masterful job of holding him off. But with that, you're bringing the rest of the field closer. And with that is Kyle Larson getting bigger and bigger and bigger in that rearview mirror. And Ad, what did you think when you saw Kyle Larson and kind of making a 3-car battle there?
It wasn't surprising because I think the broadcast did do a pretty good job of setting it up. Quint Boyer was, Kyle Larson's coming. And at the end of the day, he was 100% right. I think, what's going to get lost in this race is how good of a job that Christopher Buescher did. He was the one guy in the top 10 towards the end of that race who hadn't had a victory on a road course, and you would have no idea because he was doing a very good job of keeping Martin Truex behind him, not making a ton of mistakes. Ultimately, it was probably somewhere around, I can't remember how many laps to go. I just remember him making a few mistakes here and there, one that let Martin Truex kind of get to his bumper. And then by that time, Kyle Larson had caught up to both of them. And as they were racing side by side, we see it all the time in NASCAR to where first and second place get into a little bit of a battle and third place takes advantage. And it seemed like, honestly, that's kind of how Kyle Larson made his way through the field a bit. Because, you had Michael McDowell and Kyle Busch originally. He needed to get around to get up to the leaders. He was able to do that after a little bit of negotiating. And then to kind of see this happen, you do have to kind of tip your cap to Christopher Buescher for holding Martin Truex off as long as he did. But ultimately, you've got, if it wasn't one, it felt like it was definitely going to be the other in this situation.
And you even mentioned at the beginning of that where Christopher Buescher was the only, and I love calling him Christopher Buescher just as an ode to Dale Jr. It feels right. But Chris Buescher there, he's the only guy in that top 10 at the moment that was not a road course win in NASCAR. But you could even hear the disappointment, I think, in the post-race interview where, he said, look, we won a stage. We got a playoff point today. We finished third, I believe, at the end of the day. It wasn't like it was a bad result, but it was just a little bit off. And it's a guy that has been so close to a race win multiple times this year. Obviously, you go back to Kansas as the big one, coming closer than anyone in NASCAR history has to winning to finish second. But I also think back to 2022 at Sonoma, that first next-gen car race there, and you had Daniel Suarez who holds off Christopher Buescher in a very big upset. It was Suarez's first Cup win. You had the Pinata at Victory Lane, but Buescher's come close at Sonoma before, so this isn't the first time. It's time to start saying Chris Buescher is a road course ringer at this point. I mean, he's definitely a threat every week or at every road course now, and that's something to watch. But there was one guy last podcast, if any of our listeners were adamant about listening to, my co-host Adam O'Shea nailed it. He said this is a Martin Truex Jr. week. And early on in this race, he spun out, and I thought, oh God, was off on this one. But no, sir. No, sir. You were about one lap off from being dead on again, sir.
Every now and again, a blind nut finds a tree, as our good friend Daniel Battaglia, avid listener to the show, will say. But it just was one of those things. It wasn't the dominating performance that we're used to with Martin Truex. And I will say this, as soon as he spun, I have never felt more like an idiot because I was like, dang it. I was like, hey, you go out on a limb and you make one call and you say, you know what, it feels like it's going to be a Martin Truex week. And then all of a sudden you're spinning at stage 1 like that. But no, recovered incredibly well. And, it just seems like this is the type of persistence, the type of perseverance that you often see out of Martin Truex Jr. It's crazy to me, the fact that he could go from spinning like that to ultimately being one lap away, obviously just running out of gas. And shout out to NASCAR and whoever is the starter of the race or the flag man for just being as patient as they possibly could, waiting for Martin Truex to get over the line there. That was awesome.
Oh, did you hear apparently the PA announcer at Sonoma Raceway was on the PA system saying, "You can do it, Martin. You're so close. You're almost there." It was like everyone at the baby crawling competition when they're, "Come on, you there. Come on." You just slowly watch it. You've got the safety trucks crawling along with him. I was worried Kyle Larson was going to do his burnout straight into the back of him and push him across himself. It was just a sight to see. And I guess my thing is that, and it goes back to last week again with Ryan Blaney, where there was no mention of it at all on the broadcast. It seems like, again, this week, there was no concern Truex was going to run out of fuel. And then you saw Truex slow the pace off to start that white flag lap. And then the Fox broadcast comes on and goes, "Oh, they've told him to switch to his backup tank. He must be running low." Apparently this was on the horizon. Nobody just ever figured it out. That's 2 weeks in a row. That's weird.
It is very weird, especially, Fox is, if there's one thing that they do really well, it is generally this, because they have Larry Mack, who's kind of there to do all of their calculations and stuff like that. So it was kind of, especially to have it back-to-back weeks.
Larry Mack was in the wine country at Sonoma. Okay, his eyes were at the vineyard, not on the track. Come on.
I was just gonna say, there's a strong chance we didn't get it this week because Larry Mack may be half a barrel deep in a Cabernet somewhere. But at the end of the day, it is kind of weird to have it go back-to-back weeks with them really not even putting the fact that fuel was or could be an issue. Which, I mean, say what you will. I mean, it's one of those things. I say what you will about the broadcast, but I'll leave everyone to make their own conclusions on that one. But that feels like a pretty important piece of information to have if you're watching the end of this race. You may want to know how much fuel a guy has left.
It's just 2 weeks in a row. If I had a nickel every time, I'd have two nickels, which is just a weird occurrence. I'm gonna ruin this joke if I keep going anyway. But for as much as stage 3 was really good pure racing today, and it truly was, it saved today's race. We were very concerned after stage 1 and 2 that, oh goodness gracious, we were going to have a typical NASCAR calamity. It seems like this year we're either boom or bust in these races. It's either just pure cinema, an absolute classic, or just look away, don't show anybody this. We're going to throw away the tape and bury it in the backyard. Ad, I'm curious what you thought, because there was at one point Kyle Busch, after one of the cautions, came on the radio and said, "I think this is the point when Mr. France would come on the radio back in the day and tell everybody to get our asses together." I thought that was very fitting and just so damn true. That was a NASCAR throwback comment. What were we thinking here?
Yeah, it was perfect. I think it summed up what all of us were thinking as you were watching this race. There just was no rhythm to be had in stage 1 or 2. I think we should talk about the most notable crash of the day, and that was Josh Berry going absolutely Leroy Jenkins, locking the wheels up into, I think that was turn 11, where he never really had a chance to slow down, and I don't even think he even considered slowing down. Whether or not he had the chance is up for debate, I guess, but to absolutely send it into the corner there and just ruin a lot of different people's day, I mean, I don't even know what you say to something like that, Pop.
It was like he did a visual trust fall, and the trust fall was into Christopher Bell's right rear, and he absorbed the impact, but he completely clogged that old section there in turn 11 there. And I guess it started with Bubba Wallace, where he gets thrown out into the dirt coming into that whole chicane there and that pin turn. But Wallace saves it, comes back on the track, and then you see John Hunter Nemechek, I think it was John Hunter Nemechek, do this block on Josh Berry, who says, "I'm not giving in, I'm sending it." And it was just a traffic jam mixed with an absolute missile coming into it. And when you get those two combinations, let me tell you, it was pure chaos. And that was, I think, the big notable wreck here, Ed. Obviously, it shut everything down, but the one that I think jumps out to me was Chase Briscoe and Ricky Stenhouse originally. And then Joey Logano, who was the pole sitter and led the first 20-something laps of this race, says, "Okay, we're going to take our pit now. We're going to cycle to the back and just wait until the race strategy comes out." And Joe Logano's the victim of just Chase Briscoe back end, which just completely opened the back end of that car. I could see into the heartbeat of that car. I was a little uncomfortable. I didn't like that.
Yeah, it felt a little odd, but, it just goes to show you how important it is when you pit, because these are the types of things that, you could just get caught up of, and you have no idea. I think it's one of the beauties of NASCAR is stuff like this, to where, you're going to have to deal with, you might get caught up in something, and the things you are going to have to deal with, and the things that are going to have to go right in order to put you in the position to win a race. It is just, it's crazy to me, all the things that have to go right. And, Joey Logano had speed. I mean, there was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That was a fast car. So very unfortunate just to see him kind of get cleaned out like that, especially in such an early caution in the race.
And I do love that AAA scheme they always run out on the West Coast there, that blue Ford Mustang ad. It's a nice change of pace from that shell yellow, but it just pops. It's a great looking scheme they always run out there. So it was a shame to see a fast car get taken out early there. Did kind of work his way back up into the field a little bit there. And ultimately, I think he ended up 21st, just kind of got caught out at the end there. But we kind of talked about.
There's going to be nowhere else to talk about this, so I'm just going to throw this out there. Shout out to Ryan Preece and the Camus scheme. I really enjoyed that. Camus is a real. I'm going to go out on a California tangent here for a second, but Camus is a wine grower in California. Really cool to see the local sponsor activation. They make a great bottle of wine, very expensive, but if you ever get your hands on it, it's good stuff.
Listen, I'm just happy that Stewart Haas had another sponsor besides Overstock. So congratulations to Ryan Preece for filling that out there this weekend at Sonoma ad. But I was just going to say, we talked about how stage 1 and stage 2, there was really no flow to this race. And ultimately it started on lap 3. Like I said earlier, there was a caution on lap 3. And we might as well get into kind of the race results overall today, because Denny Hamlin's race ended before it even started, we said in the intro. 38th place finish today. As he takes the start-finish line on lap 3 of the race, the engine blows up. And when I say blows, I mean, it was clear. Smoke coming out from the sides. That's 2 weeks in a row we've seen a Toyota blow up now, too. I'm not saying that Gateway and Sonoma are similar, but that's 2 different parallels now, with a guy running out of gas late in the race and now a Toyota blowing up. What the hell's going on here?
Yeah, and it's so weird because this is the type of stuff that you would expect out of maybe a Rick Ware Racing Rocket or, BJ McLeod's team back in the day. But to have this from a JGR car so early in the race to just blow up, was it user error? I mean, at this point, I just have more questions than answers. That's kind of the big thing, is it's just, how does this happen to such an esteemed organization this quickly in a race? I mean, it just doesn't, I guess that's my thing. I just can't make sense of how it all happened.
No, and they haven't really come out and said anything yet. I'm going to put my tinfoil hat on because I love to do that every now and then here on the podcast, Ad. So stay with me here. I'm not sure if you remember this, but early on in the next-gen car, when they did that early West Coast swing and they were out, and I think it was Vegas and Phoenix, there was a couple of Toyotas that had engine issues where they said something happened with the grill, like there was sand and stuff getting caught in the grill. It was because of the heat and driving out in the desert there. Now, look, not saying that that's what happened this week with Denny Hamlin, but it is interesting to note that another Toyota blows up in a West Coast desert-like condition there when it's a little hotter out there. Maybe it's just circumstance. I don't know. But again, it's been a few years, so maybe that's just part of it. But I'm looking for any other explanation, because you don't see engine issues in NASCAR nowadays. You really don't.
No, and I guess that is an interesting point, because this is, one of the tracks where you kind of do see the dirt get thrown around. Guys will go off track, and a lot of the tracks have switched to turf and stuff like that, so you don't even get mud or that type of thing when you do drive off the track. So maybe there is something to that. I'm not sure. Obviously, I'm sure we'll get a little bit more clarity because of the availability of the data and stuff like that. And with Denny having a podcast, I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about it tomorrow. But certainly, something that's interesting, especially, it would be one thing if it was just Denny, but even Ty Gibbs, who then maybe, 12, 13 laps later, he ends up having issues. So it's just one of those things where, especially from a perspective of looking at it, this is JGR we're talking about, and not often a team that you would see have these types of issues. So very interested to kind of see what the explanation is for these types of two early issues for, half of one of the biggest teams in the sport.
Yeah, Christopher Bell last week and now Denny Hamlin this week. We'll be seeing what those Toyota engines look like moving forward, if that's something to watch. But on the other hand, looking at these results here, Michael McDowell in second, Todd Gilliland even coming in 10th, and really was in the top 10 most of the day. Todd was. Front Row Motorsports is really showing that they're taking the step to be that tier 1 Ford OEM team, but also add Michael McDowell, no matter where he's at, if it's a road course, he's a threat. I mean, obviously won last year at the Indy Roval. Sonoma shows he's got the pace again to be in the top 5.
This is crazy because it's one of those things to where this has just happened in the past few years, because Michael McDowell was never a name that you really circled, going to any racetrack, to be honest with you, except for maybe the super speedways. But for whatever reason, in these past 2 years has just shown that he has what it takes to be successful, has really worked on his craft as a road racer to the point to where you do have to start circling his name when you go to tracks like this. And, second place finish today, obviously a little bit of luck with the whole Martin Truex issue, but at the end of the day, he was around all day. He found a way to keep himself in that top 10, and that's all you can ask for, especially with him going to Spire next year. Be interested to see if he can kind of keep the momentum. We'll see how much of this was, front row's commitment to being, like you said, the number 1 OEM for Ford, and how much of this is Michael McDowell, growing as a driver. I'm just interested to see. It's one of the bigger storylines I'll be tracking into next year.
And up until probably 4 years ago, maybe, before this, when you think of Michael McDowell road courses, you think back to a vicious wreck at Watkins Glen where his car was almost torn in half. And now he's a road course ringer and veteran and a guy that's a threat everywhere you go. But ultimately, another team that is a really strong competitor at Sonoma. And he won the first next-gen car. We mentioned it, next-gen race a couple years ago. We mentioned Daniel Suarez. He only finished 14th, but was in the top 10 a lot today. And then Ross Chastain, another guy that really needed a weekend like this, where he's running top 5, top 10, comes away 5th, but Ross Chastain showing that, hey, that tractor, that Kubota tractor number 1 car is going to be pushing people on and off the dirt one way or the other, but it's going to be fast.
Oh, yeah, it was fast all weekend. We kind of had a real Ross Chastain throwback weekend from the top 5 finish here to him deciding that Kyle Busch just didn't need to be on the racetrack anymore. And, I think the explanation after the race was, I locked it up a little bit and got into him. It just seemed like, honestly, they were going back and forth and battling. And, I believe the kids would call that getting Chastained. Poor Kyle Busch, obviously, ends up with the 12th place finish. Deserved a lot better than that today, I'll say that much. But talk about a guy who just cannot get a break. And at the end of the day, just was riding around a little too close to Ross Chastain today to get a good finish, Bob.
It's not what the doctor ordered, that's for sure. I'm very curious what comes of that, if anything, with Kyle Busch, like you said, being kicked when he's down recently. Ross Chastain's definitely not the guy you want to be around in that kind of a war, but that's a new result for Kyle Busch moving forward, is maybe a little stint with Ross Chastain. I saw some barbs being thrown on social media, so we'll see if anything comes of that ad. Just to kind of put a nice little round of applause here, because it feels like we do this every time. Where did AJ Allmendinger finish again? Where did he finish? I'm sorry.
Oh, I believe that would be a 6th place finish in the top 10.
Oh, no, 6th place.
Is that good?
Well, that would be pretty good if he was a points driver for Kaulig Racing, but instead they've thrown him to the Xfinity Series to get eaten alive by Shane Van Gisbergen. But anyway, again, it's a dang shame that AJ Allmendinger is not full-time in the Cup Series when they have an open seat at Kaulig rotating. I hate it, because this is multiple top 10, top 8 finishes he's had now, just filling in that Kaulig 16 car ad. But look, I digress. It is what it is.
Just a thought. But hey, another guy who we haven't talked about him yet, but led some laps. Obviously, I think led some laps in the middle of all the calamity that was stage 1 and 2. But Tyler Reddick, another guy who, if you'd have won this race, it would have been a hometown race for him. Obviously, a lot of we'll call it coverage on Tyler Reddick and being so close to the track, so much so that they decided that we needed to see it in the middle of the race, which whatever, that's Fox for you. But yeah, I appreciate the human interest stories. I appreciate understanding a little bit more about where these guys are from and that type of thing, but maybe don't give it to me in the middle of stage 2.
Yeah, my biggest thing, I think, with Tyler Reddick was he had a fast car, but the difference between a guy like Kyle Larson and Tyler Reddick was when you got back into the field and you were stuck with not great track position, Tyler Reddick couldn't get through the field quickly. He was
Nope.
mired back there and ultimately finished 8th. It was because he got stuck where someone like Kyle Larson was able to make his way through the field quicker to when that money pit stop came late in the race. He was already in a position where he was able to run down Truex or Buescher. Reddick was just never in that position in stage 3 for as fast of a car as he did have in clean air. It never really came together for him, Ad. But let's look at some other guys toward the end here, and we can kind of tie this into our next kind of topic here. But let's look at some names here, Ad. Justin Haley, Cam Waters, Austin Dillon, Chase Briscoe. I guess Briscoe you can kind of count on this one because he did come back out there. What do these guys have in common?
Evidently, I don't believe any of them finished the race today.
Well, you wouldn't know it if you watched the broadcast today, which brings me to my next point here. We did it. We survived. This was the final race of the 2024 Fox NASCAR Cup Series broadcast window. We did it. If you were watching, pat yourselves on the back. We did it. Again, this is not for the actual play-by-play commentary because we'll get into that in a second. This is just the production quality. The fact that there were multiple drivers that DNF'd in this race and either a quick, hey, da-da-da-da-da, or nothing at all was mentioned on the broadcast when it was late in the race. To tell the entire story of the grid is the broadcast job, and they did a disservice to that. There was multiple moments today with tight cuts and just missing action. That I'm used to, but there's multiple drivers in the field today that were Justin Haley was running top 10 in stage 3, and you just look up and see he's DNF'd all of a sudden. You can't have that. You just simply can't.
No, I agree with you. And for those of you like Bob and I who did not know what happened to Justin Haley, we did some research on Twitter. Apparently, going in for his last pit stop, there was some sort of fluid leak that they couldn't figure out the source of, so they decided to take it to the garage and DNF. But yeah, how do you go from having a guy running in the top 10 to going into the pits and then eventually retiring to the garage and just not say anything about it? I was dumbfounded, to say the least. I just didn't understand, especially it's not like, Justin Haley's had a little bit of momentum lately, so it just seems like to not say anything after seeing him in the top 10, what are we doing? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. But that's really what we're expecting to deal with Fox now. Again, we're moving to NBC next, so we'll move along here just for time's sake. But we're moving to NBC next with Fox. I will say the one thing I am going to miss is that Kevin Harvick elevated that broadcast booth. Mike Joy definitely had a reinvigoration of youth. You could tell he was more energized at the track. And Clint Boyer, for all things considered, did bring something to the booth this year when Kevin Harvick could, kind of corral him and shepherd him and channel that energy into something good. It was a good, really dynamic and synergy in the booth that we kind of haven't had in the last few years at Fox.
Yeah, this was one of the booths that actually felt fun. And, because you could tell they actually got along a little bit. Mike, like you said, I think it all starts with Mike Joy because, if he doesn't have any energy, it's really going to suck the life out of the broadcast. And I think having Harvick and Boyer to kind of reel in, really, like you said, reinvigorated Mike Joy. I think, especially towards the end here, they just found their rhythm. They found a way that, it wasn't so much of them talking over each other, which you could kind of expect at the beginning of the year, because obviously you're just getting used to your new broadcast partners. And you're 100% right, Bob, because I think Clint Boyer took huge steps this year. I think Kevin Harvick is, after all of the drivers' broadcasts and stuff that he took part in, it was just such a natural transition for him. And I really do think it elevated the experience. They could use a little bit of help on the production side. We'll leave it at that. But ultimately, you can't have many complaints about the booth itself because they did a really good job of balancing being fun while also giving pertinent information to the broadcast.
Now, if only I could actually see the race, it would be lovely. We're asking too much. Maybe that's a 2025 thing, but let's go ahead and transition to our international part of the show now. Okay, get your passport out. I'm going to go ahead and lock in here. For our folks over in Australia and New Zealand that were tuning in, because we did have two different Supercars drivers with Will Brown and Cam Waters racing, they're probably wondering, just like the rest of NASCAR fans, wait, where'd my driver go? And yes, congratulations. You guys got the full NASCAR American Fox experience there. Both those guys didn't end up finishing there. Waters 35th. And then where did Will Brown end up finishing there? I had 31st.
31st, yeah.
Yeah, he might have actually been a couple laps down, but I know at one point he was in the garage. But Cam Waters ended up DNFing, even though the broadcast did not really mention that. Tough day for them. Will Brown showed speed early in the weekend. I think he was third in practice. Mm-hmm. They said there was some kind of electrical gearbox issue that really kind of messed with his whole weekend there. But outside of the criticism with Fox and, not learning about them as much as we can and just really figuring out where they finished in the race, what did you think overall about their weekend and just their experience here?
I think obviously very cool. I think American NASCAR fans, anytime you see these guys coming over from Aussie Supercars, you are going to have a little bit of an elevated opinion just because of what SVG has done, whether it was last year in Chicago or this past weekend in Sonoma. I think it is very clear that there is a ton of talent in Aussie Supercars, especially when it comes to road course racing. As our comments said earlier in this week, if you could handle Bathurst, you could handle just about anywhere. And ultimately, it's a shame that there were so many issues with, from the technical side of, whether it be the electric gearbox issue or whatever, whatever Will Brown had going on. It just seemed like these are the types of opportunities that NASCAR can't miss on. And to have these guys come over and to have that extra buzz around this type of race, I mean, it's a random Sonoma race in the middle of June, kind of the sticking point of the season to where, you're just kind of waiting to get to the playoffs. So to have these types of drivers to be able to come and to put on a show and to really showcase their abilities, I think it really only helps the sport. Obviously, hopefully this is more than a one-off. Hopefully they come back and keep on trying to run these cars, because I think this is definitely a rising tide lifts all ships situation. And NASCAR has shown an interest in kind of getting into that international market, and this is the perfect way to do it.
100%. And you have Cam Waters, who's actually run multiple truck races already this year. Will Brown, the Supercars points leader, has expressed his pleasure in the running with RCR. So, that he obviously did take the Brody Kostecki rumored seat from last year. My takeaway is that RCR 33 car that Kostecki ran the Indy road course last year, now Brown this year, is that it's shown speed ad. Both guys have been really fast in practice, and then something has happened mechanically to that car along the weekend that has just completely derailed it. So we really haven't been able to see their full talent on display. And like you said, Ad, we do rate them a little bit higher because of SVG's background and how he came into Chicago with that perfect storm to win. But these guys are some of the most talented drivers on the planet for a reason. I think, every motorsport entity, whether it's F1, IndyCar, NASCAR, even Supercars, we kind of put our heads in the sand and put ourselves in a bubble and say, oh, these are the best guys. But then you have someone like an SVG, a Will Brown come over, a Kyle Larson in IndyCar, and show that each of these series have so much talent. And I think that's the beauty of NASCAR with some of these open charters, Ad, is not only do these guys want to come over and compete, but it just shows the competition level, how it compares across international waters. It's fascinating to see how they all I mean, the fact that you had at COTA a couple months ago, Ricky Stenhouse and Kamino Kobayashi getting into it, one of the best touring car drivers in the world, and Ricky Stenhouse, it doesn't get any better than that.
No, and I think you're 100% right. Obviously this type of stuff can't happen in F1 just because of, the setup of how their system is. They've got obviously 2 drivers per team. You're not going to have like these one-off type of races. But, I think as far as, like you said, the Supercars, the Indy cars, NASCAR, just to have any sort of cross-pollination between these sports and to kind of have the different eyeballs look at the different series and, to kind of force us as race fans to take our heads out of our respective corners and saying, oh, well, our drivers are the best, to have guys so willing to be able to jump in the seat and say, okay, hey, we'll prove it. Let's see how I would do it in NASCAR. Let's see Kyle Larson. Let's see how I would run in the Indy 500. These are the types of things that if motorsports is going to continue to grow worldwide, I think these types of opportunities for drivers are paramount. And are things that need to keep happening. Obviously, today the results weren't what either of whether Will Brown or Cam Waters wanted, but at the end of the day, just to have them in the car, I think, is a huge success, both for Aussie Supercars and for NASCAR as a whole.
And I agree 100% how you said a rising tide lifts all ships. It's the same way in motorsports. I think you and me are the same way. I know I catch myself paying attention to the Supercars results every week. I see, hey, I've seen some of those guys race before. I'm familiar with them now. You start to follow some of them on social media. I mean, Will Brown was at Cracker Barrel every single morning in America. He's a very likable guy from what I can gather, and I'm going to start paying attention to him more. And just for Supercars in general, I start to pay in. The indigenous schemes are coming out for a couple weeks out. Some of these cars are sick. And just you start to catch yourself in the fandom of Supercars, and none of that would have happened this time last year up until SVG and some of these guys start to come over. So it is a perfect synergy, and it's going to work out. I'm telling you, more motorsports need to lean into this, because you can see Supercars on their social media tweeting about their guys over here. NASCAR was tweeting about Kyle Larson in IndyCar. Now, the waiver thing, I don't have the energy for it. That's a whole different thing. But otherwise, we're pushing Kyle Larson into Indy 500. It's a good thing for everyone. It'd be great to see McLaughlin and Newgard and some of those guys come over and do the double on the IndyCar side. Again, every time you're exposed to more motorsports fans, it's a win, because at the end of the day, no matter if you're an IndyCar fan, an F1 fan, a NASCAR fan, MotoGP, Supercars, we all like to watch people go fast and compete. And that's something that you can sell people on.
Absolutely. You hit the nail right on the head. I think it is one thing to sit here and speculate who is better than who. It's another thing for guys to be willing to get on the track and actually prove it. And, you just kind of have to tip your cap for the willingness of the modern day driver to be able to jump in new seats and just say, hey, I'm going to give this a shot. Who knows? Maybe a NASCAR guy will go and run an Aussie GP race or Supercars race. I think it would be interesting as hell. It's just one of these things. You have no idea how any of the schedules work out, but it certainly is. You're 100%. I think the comment I couldn't agree with more is that I have started caring about Australian Supercars more than I ever would have, because of some of the things that NASCAR and the Supercars have kind of gone back and forth with here. And I think that's a really cool thing. I think like the rising tide really does lift all ships, and I'm just excited to kind of see what the future holds.
100%. Well, we did have, just to kind of put a bow on this whole weekend at Sonoma, we did have SVG go back-to-back last night at Sonoma after winning at Portland. So he is officially taking over the Xfinity Series as far as at least the road course side. AJ Allmendinger just kind of shtick has been taken by SVG. But Ad, real quick, just wanted your thoughts. What's going on there with SVG, and especially this newfound rivalry potentially with Austin Hill?
I think the SVG stuff, if this surprises you, you haven't been paying attention, because ultimately, in any road course he showed up to, he's had speed no matter what he's driving. It just feels like you have to. He feels like the classic road course ringer, to where you kind of have to have his name circled anytime you go to any sort of road course, because at this point, that's just the respect that he has earned. As far as the Austin Hill and SVG stuff, you're seeing one guy who is incredibly likable in SVG, who seems very down to earth, is kind of just has that laid back attitude, has really taken his entire NASCAR experience into stride. And then on the other side, you have Austin Hill, who, say what you will about Austin Hill, but he's a little bit of a whiner. I think, at least that's my opinion. Just a guy who, even in the post race, if you're mad, just come out and say that. Don't just sit there and, oh, well, the keyboard warrior's online and da-da-da-da-da. It's like, look, man, you've got your opportunity to speak for yourself. Go ahead and just say what's on your mind. Like, you don't have to make it this big, like, oh, well, no matter what I say, I'm wrong, and da-da-da-da. All that may be true, but as fans, we would rather you be angry and would rather you express yourself, as opposed to talking about how angry we would all be if you actually expressed yourself. So it's just the classic case of somebody who is very easy to get behind and very easy to kind of, to like and to root for at SVG. And then Austin Hill, who just can't seem to get out of his own way, whether it be on the racetrack or in the post-race with his interviews or anything like that. It really does feel like when the popular kid at school gets into some sort of disagreement with someone who is less popular, even if the less popular kid has a point, he's just going to get absolutely dummied because SVG is so popular right now and is honestly has done so well and has taken everything in stride since he's come to the United States and really kind of taken on NASCAR. It just feels like there's no hope for Austin Hill in this rivalry.
The Libs are getting to Austin Hill. You heard it here first, folks. The Libs are getting to Austin Hill. It's sad to see it. No, I think you're spot on there, Ad. I would just be repeating literally everything you said because I think this one is one of those. Not everything is black and white, but this one feels like it's fairly black and white.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say this one's black and white. I would just say it's American versus Australian, New Zealander. And
ironically enough, if you would have said 20 years ago a New Zealander from a foreign racing series was going to come over and be a fan favorite against a young, southern, outspoken, brash racer, I think Ricky Bobby would be rolling in his grave. But here we are. But regardless, we are Breaking Balls, episode 86. If you've made it this far, again, thank you for staying. I don't know how you've done it, but be a friend, tell a friend. We do this on a weekly basis. We put out videos and clips all the time, shorts, you name it. We are active on Twitter, Instagram, now even TikTok, so go give us a follow out there, Ad. You are manning the Chinese app out there for us. I got to hold it down over here on the American side, but go ahead, Ad. Finish us out here. Take us home.
Yeah, for the love of God, please follow us on TikTok. We're going to be posting clips and stuff like that. But yeah, if you're new here, thank you so much for subscribing, liking, following along with our content. We really appreciate it. We're just two friends who love NASCAR, just love staying in touch and talking about it. So by all means, please follow along, comment. If you like what we're saying, if you don't like what we're saying, just let us know either way. We're here to hear about it. We're here to kind of create this discourse and community around NASCAR, and we're just thankful, thankful for the opportunity and thankful for people who listen to us, period.
There you go. Well, episode 86 of the Breaking Balls podcast. We'll be back next weekend, going from the wine fields and vineyards of Sonoma out to the cornfields of Iowa. Polar to America's moment there, but we'll be back next Sunday to break it all down for episode 87 next weekend at Iowa. But until then, we'll be back next week, folks. We'll see you then.
Bye.